Mm. Think of a smoke detector. Nobody thinks about it. Nobody talks about it. Nobody buys it lunch or puts its name on a plaque. But the one morning it matters, it's the only thing standing between everything you built and ash. I was the smoke detector, and they ripped me off the ceiling without checking if the battery still belonged to them. My name is Daniel. I'm 51 years old. I drive a 2009 Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard and a cooler in the back seat because I never got around to replacing the one that broke. I have exactly one dress shirt that I ironed myself, and I wore it to every performance review, every client walkthrough, and eventually to the meeting where my boss handed me a manila envelope and told me the company was evolving. 17 years. That's how long I gave Hartwell Business Solutions. 17 years of showing up before anyone else arrived and leaving after the cleaning crew. 17 years of knowing where every cable ran, every contract lived, every password had been written on a post-it and then lost by someone who thought they were too important to use the password manager I set up in 2012. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. I was not a victim. I am not here asking for sympathy. What I am here to tell you is that when you spend nearly 2 decades building the invisible infrastructure of a company, sometimes the infrastructure has your name on it. Literally. And sometimes the people who fire you forget to check. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I started at Hartwell in 2007 as an IT coordinator. The title sounds modest, and it was, at first. At the time, Hartwell was 9 people in a rented office above a dental practice in Columbus, Ohio. My boss, the founder, was a man named Richard. Richard was one of those visionary types who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were standing at the beginning of something historic. He also could not figure out how to print double-sided, had a documented fear of spreadsheets, and once sent a company-wide email by accident that was meant for his wife. Richard needed someone to hold the technical side of the company together while he went out and shook hands and made promises. That someone became me. I want you to understand what that actually meant in practice. It meant I was the one who called the building manager when the HVAC system started sounding like a diesel engine at 2 in the morning before a major client presentation. It meant I was the one who stayed until midnight rebuilding a corrupted database the night before our biggest quarterly report. It meant that when the company needed to register for a cloud-based project management platform in 2009, and Richard was on a flight to Atlanta, and the vendor needed a signature and a credit card and an account administrator named on the licensing agreement, he called me from the jetway and said, "Just use your name, Danny. I'll sort it out when I land." He never sorted it out. I want to pause here and ask you something, because I think some of you already know exactly what I am talking about. Have you ever been the person who just handles it? Not because it was in your job description, not because you were asked in any formal sense, but because the alternative was watching something fall apart and you were the only one standing close enough to catch it? Have you ever looked up one day and realized that what started as just this once had quietly become the entire architecture of how a place functioned? And that not a single person above you had any idea? That was my life at Hartwell for 17 years. The company grew. Richard hired a COO named Marcus in 2011, a sharp-dressed guy from Chicago who wore cufflinks to Tuesday morning stand-ups and used the phrase bandwidth to mean something other than internet speed. Then came a VP of operations, a director of client success, a head of people and culture, an actual title on actual business cards. Every new layer of management arrived with new processes, new org charts, new titles for old jobs. My title changed 3 times. IT coordinator became systems administrator, became head of technology infrastructure. The pay went up each time, I will give them that. But the job itself stayed the same. I was the person who knew where everything was. I was the person you called when the thing you needed wasn't on any official list. I was the institutional memory that nobody had thought to write down. Richard retired in 2019. I shook his hand at the going-away party in the conference room, ate a piece of sheet cake with white frosting, and watched him hand the company off to a board that had been quietly assembling itself for 2 years. The new CEO was a woman named Victoria who had spent the previous decade turning around mid-sized B2B firms, which meant she was very good at identifying inefficiencies and very fast at eliminating them. She was also, I want to be fair, genuinely smart. We had a good working relationship for about 2 years. She respected that I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. She came to me when she needed real answers, not the ones that had been polished for the slide deck. I thought we had an understanding. Then Hartwell got acquired. In the spring of 2024, a private equity group called Meridian Capital bought a controlling stake in the company. It happened fast, the way these things do. One quarter you're hearing rumors, the next quarter there's a consultant in a corner office taking notes in the leather journal, and by the third quarter there's a new strategic alignment initiative that nobody can fully explain but everyone is nervous about. The consultant's name was Brennan. He was 34 years old, had an MBA from a school that he mentioned within the first 3 minutes of every conversation, and had a habit of saying, "Let's pressure test that assumption," whenever someone said something he didn't understand but didn't want to admit he didn't understand. Brennan spent 6 weeks walking around our office with his leather journal. He sat in on team meetings. He asked a lot of questions about headcount and process redundancy. He never once asked me what systems the company ran on or how they were maintained. He did, however, ask me twice how old I was. I knew what was coming. I think most of us did. You develop a kind of radar for it after enough years in corporate America. The language starts to shift. Evolving our capabilities means someone is getting replaced. Right-sizing the team means multiple people are getting let go. Going in a new direction means the direction doesn't include you. My meeting was on a Thursday. Victoria called me in at 2 in the afternoon. Brennan was there, sitting to her left with his journal open. I noticed he hadn't written anything in it yet. Victoria told me that following the integration with Meridian, the company was restructuring its technology function. They were bringing in a managed services provider to handle infrastructure going forward. The role I had occupied was being eliminated. This was not a performance issue. My contributions over the years had been invaluable. There was a severance package in the envelope. She slid the manila envelope across the table. I looked at it. I looked at her. I looked at Brennan, who was now writing something in his journal which I found irritating. I asked if this was final. Victoria said yes. She said it kindly, which almost made it worse. I picked up the envelope. I thanked her for the years. I meant it, or most of it. Then I asked about the transition process, whether they needed documentation, a knowledge transfer period, any kind of handoff. Brennan said the managed services provider had extensive onboarding protocols and they were confident in the transition plan. I nodded. I went back to my desk. I boxed up the things that were mine, which did not take long because I had never been the type to personalize a workspace. A spare phone charger, a coffee mug from a conference in 2015, a small cactus that had somehow survived through 3 office relocations. I carried the box to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a while. Then I drove home. For the first week I did almost nothing. I am not ashamed to say that. 17 years is a long time, and losing it deserves at least a few days of sitting in your own quiet. I slept in. I made breakfast at 10 in the morning. I watched more television than I had watched in the previous 5 years combined. I called my brother, who had been through something similar at a manufacturing company in 2018, and he said what he said then. Give it a week, then get angry, then get moving. Solid advice. I've always respected my brother. In the second week, I started going through paperwork, not for any specific reason at first. More out of habit, the same instinct that made me always keep a backup of a backup, always document what I'd done and why, always save the confirmation email even when I was sure I'd never need it. I had boxes of paperwork, binders from the early years when everything was still done on paper, printed email threads, hard copies of contracts and agreements that I'd kept because Richard always said print it and keep it, you'll be glad you did. I had not thought about most of this material in years. On a Wednesday morning about 12 days after I left the building with my cactus, I opened a binder from 2009. There it was. The licensing agreement for CloudTrack, the project management platform that Hartwell had run its entire client operations on for 15 years. 60+ client accounts, hundreds of active projects, all of it running on a platform that, according to the agreement in my hand, was registered to a private individual as the account administrator. That individual was me. My name. My personal email address, which I still had, my signature on the original vendor contract. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, not moving. The coffee in front of me went cold. I read the document 3 times. Now, I want to be clear about what I did next, because this matters. I did not immediately do anything dramatic. I did not call the company. I did not log into the account to check anything. I did nothing except call my attorney, a man named Howard who had handled my home purchase in 2016 and who I trusted because he was meticulous and unhurried and never told me what I wanted to hear. I scanned the document and emailed it to Howard that afternoon. Howard called me back the next morning. He asked me a number of specific questions. He asked whether I had used any personal funds for the account. I had not. He asked whether I had ever formally transferred the account to the company. I had not, because Richard said he would handle it, and I had let that slide for 15 years like the fool I apparently was. He asked whether the current licensing renewal was due. I told him I didn't know offhand. Howard said to find out, quietly, through the vendor's public renewal portal, without logging in. I found out that afternoon. The annual enterprise licensing renewal had lapsed 11 days earlier. 11 days. I had been sitting at home eating cereal and watching cable news while the license that ran Hartwell's entire client management infrastructure had quietly expired, with no one at the company apparently aware that the renewal notifications had been going to my personal email for 15 years. I checked my email. There they were. 14 days before expiration, renewal notice. 7 days, second notice. 3 days, final notice. 1 day, account suspension warning. I had not checked that inbox in 3 weeks. The account had been suspended for 4 days. I want to stop here and ask you something. What would you have done? I am genuinely curious. You have just discovered that a company that eliminated your position after 17 years, that handed you a manila envelope and told you they were going in a new direction, is currently running on infrastructure that is registered to you, was suspended while you were on your couch eating cereal, and for which you hold the only active administrative credentials. What is your next move? I called Howard back. Howard was quiet on the phone for a moment. Then he said, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, he said. Daniel, we need to make sure we handle this correctly, because you are holding something significant here, and I don't want you to drop it. We spent the next 2 days going through everything carefully. Howard contacted the vendor directly on my behalf and confirmed the administrative account status. He also pulled together documentation on what exactly the account controlled. The answer was a lot. Client project histories going back to 2011. Active deliverable timelines for current engagements, invoicing records. Automated client communication workflows. The kind of institutional data that a company does not realize is the load-bearing wall until the wall is gone. Howard sent a formal letter to Hartwell on a Friday afternoon. The following Monday morning, my phone rang at 7:43 a.m. It was Marcus, the COO, the cufflinks guy. His voice had a quality I had never heard in it before in 13 years of knowing him. He sounded like someone who had been awake since 3 in the morning, which I later found out he had. He said there seemed to be a situation with the CloudTrack platform. He asked if I was aware of any issues. I told him I was aware of the letter my attorney had sent. He paused. He asked if we could speak informally, off the record, just to understand the situation. I told him my attorney had advised me to conduct all communications through him at this point. Marcus paused again, longer this time. Then he said quietly, Dan, come on. We go back a long time. We did go back a long time. We did go back a long time. And I thought about that. I thought about the year I stayed until 2 in the morning rebuilding a database the night before his division's quarterly review, because he had let his team fall behind and needed someone to bail them out. I thought about the client crisis in 2018 that I personally resolved on a Saturday by remotely accessing a server from my truck in a Target parking lot. I thought about the Thursday afternoon 2 weeks earlier when he had sat across from me and said nothing while Victoria read from a prepared statement about the company evolving. I told Marcus that my attorney would be in touch. I hung up. Victoria called 40 minutes later. She was more measured, more direct. She acknowledged the situation, said the company wanted to resolve it professionally, asked what I was looking for. I told her the same thing I told Marcus. Attorney, Howard and Hartwell's legal team went back and forth for the better part of 2 weeks. I will not walk you through every detail of that because some of it is still confidential and some of it is frankly boring. The kind of document swapping and precedent citing that is only interesting if you are the one watching the meter run on an hourly legal fee. What I will tell you is what we were asking for. Not a vendetta, not a dramatic public humiliation, not anything that required me to be the kind of person I don't want to be. We asked for a fair buyout of the account administrative rights. We asked for a retroactive consulting fee covering the period when the account should have been formally transferred to the company but wasn't. a period which Howard argued represented 17 years of ongoing IP stewardship for which I had never been separately compensated. We asked for an extension of my severance and benefits through the end of the calendar year. We also asked for a letter, a formal written acknowledgement from Victoria and the board that my contributions to the company over 17 years had been foundational to its operations, not in generic language, in specific language, with specific examples. Brennan apparently objected to that last part. I was told that he found it unusual. I found it the most important part. 3 weeks after Howard's initial letter, Hartwell's legal team agreed to the full settlement, all of it, including the letter. Howard told me on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my kitchen, same table where I had found the old binder, same coffee mug from the conference in 2015. I want to tell you something about how I felt in that moment because I think it matters. It was not triumphant exactly. It wasn't the way you feel after winning something where the other person loses badly. It was quieter than that. It felt more like the smoke detector going off when it's supposed to. Not exciting. Not traumatic. Just correct. The thing did what it was built to do, at exactly the moment it was needed. I signed the settlement paperwork the following Monday. On the Friday after that, I received the formal letter by email and by certified mail. It had Victoria's signature and 3 board members' signatures. It named specific systems I had built and maintained. It named the CloudTrack platform and acknowledged that the administrative account had been under my stewardship for the duration of the company's use of the platform. It named the 2018 client crisis resolution. It named the 2012 database rebuild. It used the word foundational, which was the word I had asked for. I read it twice. I printed it out. I put it in a new binder. I have since started consulting, independent work, helping small businesses build and manage their technical infrastructure. I charge appropriately for my time. I document every administrative account and every client's name from day one. I write it into every engagement contract, all system registrations under client entity, no exceptions, transferred and verified before project close. I think about Richard sometimes, about the way he used to call from airport jetways with a quick fix that was meant to be temporary. I don't blame him for any of it. He built something from nothing with 9 people above a dental practice, and some corners got cut, and some of those corners had my name on them. That's just what happens when you're moving fast and trusting people and not stopping to read the fine print. The lesson I took away is not trust no one, or protect yourself first, or any of the cynical things you might expect from a story like this. The lesson I took away is simpler than that, and I think it is one that a lot of you already know in your bones, even if no one has said it to you directly. Document everything. Know what is in your name. Not as a weapon, not as leverage, just as basic self-respect. Know what you have built. Know what your name is attached to. Know that invisible infrastructure is still infrastructure, and the person who builds it has a right to understand what they have built. Because 17 years is a long time, and what you put into something over that time doesn't disappear when they hand you a manila envelope. It lives in the cables you ran, and the systems you set up, and the contracts you signed, and the posted passwords you converted into an encrypted vault in 2012. It lives in the phone calls at midnight, and the Saturday parking lots, and the databases rebuilt while everyone else slept. It belongs to you, in ways that matter. And sometimes, when everything else has been taken back, what belongs to you is exactly enough. If this story meant something to you, or if you've had a moment in your career where you realize you were holding more than people thought you were, I'd like to know about it. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because the stories I tell here are for people who've been in the room and know exactly what the room costs. This is Casey's Revenge. And we're just getting started.